The unveiling of the company of heaven. Every man and every woman is a star.
Hello everyone, and welcome again to the Free Radical Media Podcast. I am Eric Scott Picard, joined by my co-founder and co-host Patrick Ryan. This evening on the podcast we have Ananda Bosman. Ananda Bosman is a public speaker, teacher, cosmologist, and musician, as well as a writer of thousands of pages in books and articles. He has lectured and written broadly on topics including alchemy, cryptology, ontology, science, and shamanism, many of which are discussed in our conversation here. Now tonight we're going to be jumping directly into the conversation. We were having such a lively talk before the show started that we decided just to flip on the recorder and let it go. So without further ado, we present a very interesting show with Ananda Bosman. We're joined it already in progress.
I don't really believe myself as a ufologist. I just know my experiences, and I have 128 witnesses with me who have seen what is commonly called a UFO, or a unified field object, as we like to say, into the physical, which includes aeronautical engineers, it includes psychiatrists, doctors, double PhDs, etc. And just recently, one of our units that engages cosmic dialogues, just a few weeks ago, got results up to 10 meters distance, so the UFOs came extremely close. I personally believe that we have begun and ushered in the age of cosmic dialogue with a cosmic intelligence. We should not define it or limit it to just extraterrestrial intelligence or extratemporal intelligence or just interdimensional intelligence. I believe what's going on is way beyond that. I also think that the contact experience itself, every part of it, the physical aspects, the information that's given, the places one is taken, itself is a three-dimensional or higher graphic interface. And it's
Just,
like...
just as an aside here, when you say that you believe that it's beyond a multi-dimensional, extraterrestrial, or extratemporal, are you talking about some kind of like a divine intelligence? I mean, what else is there left? This is just a complete aside. Yeah. I'm just curious.
Yeah. No, we can keep our logistics. I mean, of course, we can take theological and epistemological logistics too, no problem with that. But this can be taken, if we take this forward, so why not? Why don't we dance off into this? It's I think in some years' time, maybe 100, maybe 200, maybe 1,000, probably sooner, the patents that were made by Dr. Chris Illett and Dr. Rogero Santilli on hadronic space-time machines are going to become realizable. In fact, there are experiments underway at present where a specific unique type of matter, which was not predicted in quantum physics or in classical mechanics or Einsteinian mechanics, has been made in the laboratory and has been made practically and technologically applicable, but which works as a body temperature superconductor called magnecols, which really collapses the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. The hadronic space-time machines travel in space and time, and they use new planes of mathematics And these new planes of mathematics, which were never discovered before in any of the previous theses on mathematics and geometry, completely changes everything. For the first time, it deals with the true parameters of objectivity. Objectivity requires the inner equation and the outer equation. All physics is dealt with that we know of in history, including quantum mechanics and string theory, is dealing with the outer problem. It doesn't deal with inner problems like the ionosphere. And so hadronic mechanics did, by introducing an ISO unit, which ISO lifts all the other mathematical planes. And ISO is really a kind of mirror-like unit where the relationship of 1 to every other numbers, because 2 is basically 1, 1, and 3 is 1, 1, 1, etc. So the relationship of 1 to every other number is an ISO unit, you could say, unto itself. And this has an iso-self dual, which mirrors it, so that they're kind of like 4 conjugates. The ISO plane was discovered really properly in 1986, but it was applied practically to biology, to the biological sciences, which was a quite extraordinary feat by Dr. Chris Illert, who was trying to model biological mollusk shells and several other conch shell morphologies in his computer, and he used standard Platonic and Euclidean geometries. And as he was trying to,
doctor's name briefly, Ananda? Could you repeat
yes,
that name?
Certainly, yes. It's Dr. Chris Illert. That is Ilert. He's in Australia. He he's quite well published, especially in the hadronic physics community, which is a special and growing, massively growing community, which has its applications in corporate science and is very taboo in the let's say the science church, such as Nature magazine, because it turns so many things on its head. But what Illert did was that he found that standard Euclidean geometry wasn't able to model life in a dynamic system. So he decided to apply ISO mathematics and ISO geometry. And when he did this, he was able to model in a dynamic state 100,000 different morphologies of conch shells, so that they operated as they actually grow in real life, as we see them. But the trouble with it was that it needed 6 time arrows, which is the second plane discovered by hadronic physics, which is the genotopic level. And the genotopic level is kind of equivalent to the holographic universe. And so 6 dimensions of time were added. So basically a mollusk shell, to appear 3-dimensional, but yet animate and growing, is time traveling in 6 directions of time. And that was for a very basic life form. So those kind of physics were demonstrated already in 1990. Of course, in applying this new mathematics to chemistry, only in 1998 was lightning simulated, because lightning in all physics is kind of a mystery force, because it is an inner equation of the ionosphere. So by hadronic physics, it was easy to model, and a hadronic plasma arc flow reactor modeled or simulated lightning. And when matter was exposed to this plasma arc or lightning-like arc, it changes matter. It changes matter where the electrons are in any position around the nucleus in the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. That uncertainty is reduced to a flat state of 2 iso electrons that are counter-rotating and are starting to go into the nucleus of the atom. Usually the electron orbital is 10 to the minus 9 of a centimeter, and they go into each other's orbit like a lemniscate, overlapping a little at 10 to the minus 11. The hadronic horizon, the hyperdense media in the nucleus of the atom, is 10 to the minus 13, and that's a very interesting horizon. So they're kind of dipping into this hadronic horizon and are acting as what is now understood as iso-superconductivity, and it's been accepted through Dr. Alexander Animalou. And it turns out that any material, waste material, especially crude material, shit, etc., manure, when put through this plasma arc flow, will produce very superior magnet gas that can be put into a car engine, etc. Now, recently, last year, in astronomy, some astronomers decided to take the ISO theory and apply it to their lenses. So they took a concave lens to have the ISO unit to look for antimatter, and they started to find antimatter galaxies, antimatter meteors, and other astronomical objects. They weren't visible before because the mathematics wasn't applied to the science of lenses. This is now being applied to the microscope as well, because the representation of what we have of our physical body is through a scanning electron microscope, which basically kills animate life and it reduces it to a quantum moment. So you're looking at dead skeletons rather than an animate system. And a lot of the material in our body has remained invisible in its actual dynamic animate structure because the mathematics weren't there to provide the lens refraction systems, ISO refraction systems, to observe the actual material of our body. And our body appears to be made of an even more complex material than the first ISO chemicals that were made in December of 1998. And which are actually technologically available. The U.S. Marines, the Naval Technological Department is using the magna gas flame for welding the submarines. That is a fact that can be tracked on the stocks of magna gas. So the flame that is produced from the hadronic reactor is a purer flame. It doesn't have any impurities. It has oxygen and nitrogen as relatives, as output, and the welding speed is much quicker. So it leaves no flaws on the melted surface. It cuts through steel 60% faster than a standard welding torch. But the human hand mysteriously passes through the flame without being cut, because in hadronic physics we're made out of a more complex matter called hypermagnicals, which is the living dynamic system of our genetic material. Symmetry is never broken under 4.5. In the four positions or the four letters of our DNA, the four base pairs, of course, 3 occupied by an amino acid and 1 not, 4.5 in the hadronic model of it. That's never broken, and the state where it's not broken is in a hypermagnicular state. But this I have covered elsewhere on the internet. Dennis McKenna found, of course, our application of hadronic chemistry interesting in relation to entheogens, and especially to making macromolecular coherent systems between different plant molecules or different biological molecules in resonance to the DNA, which is another area we've gone into as well.
So that would make sense, how these extra-dimensional sort of realities, experienced on entheogens and such, how, they're seemingly invisible and seemingly, something that's a quanta away, so to speak, we're able to pass right through without even seemingly them interacting with us or having any sort of effect. I mean, that sort of sheds light on that sort of phenomena.
Well, I find by and large that entheogens give more like an interface, they can do, they don't have to, a representation of other spaces, especially if there is a contact. My experience as a teenager with contacts goes into the physical. Without for my first 7 years of contact, I didn't even drink coffee, and I hadn't touched anything so-called psychoactive. I didn't know chocolate and these things were psychoactive, or Indian spices, but that doesn't really matter. And I had at that point, my first 7 years, at least 35 witnesses, which included daylight landings. There are intelligences, clear intelligences that are interfacing with us, that become physically visible. That you could say it's like taking a very high qualitative entheogen state. And I don't mean the low levels people are used to with ayahuasca. I mean extremely high thresholds, which will produce a state of which no shaman can control, which produces at times a kind of apotheosis for the individual, where only the existential foundation of their primordial self becomes the security upon which one can lean, which is in the Vedas called the fourfold Godhead or fourfold Anthropos, with its own anthropic satience, which is essentially the four principles that are indivisible to each other, which in the Rig Veda are called Indra, or being, Soma, or infinite reflection, Surya, or Savitar, which is the sun, which is instant knowing or divine intelligence. You just know it, and there's no way that you could have known it, but you just know it. And consciousness. Those are the four components of the existential self, which anyone can directly investigate by investigating themselves in the very living moment. And every level of physics is based on that. It all comes from Aristotle's ontology. Ontology is the branch of metaphysics that deals with the art of being. And everything begins with the art of being. When there's being can then describe itself, and this gives qualities. It gives qualitative properties, which can be repeated and classed into properties like elements, fire or warmth, etc. And then there are loops of these descriptions, and these qualitative descriptions are given more and more detail, and then are analyzed by the art of being. And in that sense, all of the sciences are still metaphysics, even the new hadronic mechanics. I was dragged into the research on so-called psychoactive molecules by the cosmic intelligence, who describe themselves as existing in a state of past, present, and future at the same time. That is like a time of reference. And able to modulate any aspect of reality. And in front of witnesses, when I would go into the beams of these ships, I would be digitalized. I would turn electric blue and I would disappear. I would go into my own experience of that when it happened quickly was I basically went into a kind of a network of universal oneness linked to a myriad of sapient perspectives or nodes in a nexus of a unified field that is conjugating from every perspective as a kind of synergy. So you forget yourself, and it's very, very difficult to bring it back. Later on, as I was brought into research chemicals, and I believe the whole contact domain is not properly and objectively looked at unless it is also analyzed in terms of proper biological psychoactive molecules, which are clearly produced, and I have proven are produced with pilots in our darkroom retreat research from '92 onwards, where we are isolated for 14 days in darkness, and the molecules of 5-methoxy-DMT and dimethyltryptamine via 6-methoxy-tetrahydrobeta-carboline or penoline, which is the selective monoamine oxidase inhibitor that's produced by the pineal gland, enables, once at the 360 milligram dose, the dimethyltryptamine on the 8th day to come out from the shit where it is in great quantities and produced by the lungs in small amounts by the pineal gland. Earlier on in the 4th, 5th day, you already get the metabolism of 5-methoxy-dimethyltryptamine. And then on the 11th day, a whole new category starts to happen in our darkroom work. In that category, the experiences are very similar to the cyclohexanones. I would say they're identical to the cyclohexanones, which produces a completely different type of experience than the tryptamines. And so I was dragged into that research in 1992. I had my experiences. Witnesses had seen me disappear, remodulated on a digital level. And now they said, you've got to look at this. And there was a group of different intelligences that were in the process of communicating. It took basically a 15-year-old and educate and download, did a vast array of subjects. I was very resistant to anything related to drugs per se. I had no knowledge. I was fully socially conditioned on that. But they said, no, you have to look at this. I had all the experiences I wanted. I'd travel out of my body. I had extraterrestrial virtual reality that took me to the moons of Jupiter, through the sun to parallel universes. These were experienced with the 5 somatic senses, kind of, as if they were totally real. So I didn't feel I needed anything like that. But they basically said, you had a bicycle accident, you had us. There are loads of people who are not going to have that, and this wakes them up. Therefore, you need to know, and it's valid. And so I was told to look at the somas, that was the term that was used, Harmine and DMT is related to some of my translation experiences. This was 1992. So I began research. There was no internet, and my teacher there was Manu Salvana, one of the so-called ultra-terrestrials, as we say, who turned out to be an author of the Rig Veda. The Rig Veda, one of the oldest manuscript really of humanity, is said to be numinously authored, and in the Anukramanas, that is the appendix, it describes the different numinous authors, some of which are more what we would term extraterrestrial, extratemporal spin-offs of humanity. Others are ultra-terrestrial, being in more in greater topological domains of complexity, or summary, which are superluminal. And Manu Salvana is described to have written 3 hymns of the 9th book of the Rig Veda on Soma, so which was very interesting for me to discover when I became 32, many years after I did my research. So I found the Karolinska Institute in Sweden had done research with yogis who'd been meditating in the cave for 5 years, and that their blood analysis showed that they had high levels of beta-carbolines. Now, beta-carbolines are the family such as harmine and harmaline, which people are now quite familiar with in terms of ayahuasca. We went to the Pagunum harmala plant, which was called Soma by my guidance system, and rapidly I started doing research and discovered, in fact, scholars had already botanically identified Soma Raja, or King Soma, in the Rig Veda as Pagunum harmala. Later, error crept in by students of some of the scholars, and said it was Ruta graveolians, cultivated rue. However, at the time, the Rig Vedic times, when the Sarasvati River Valley and the river of the Sarasvati was actually fluous and was flowing, it dried up 4,900 years ago. NASA remote imaging imagery showed that it existed 4,900 years ago, going from Lake Manaswar and going through Pakistan, Afghanistan, Rajasthan, and through India. So the Sarasvati River was rediscovered, and the Sarasvati River Valley culture is the most ancient archaeological culture found there, and they're fully sophisticated. It's long before the Indus culture. It's before the Harappa culture. The Sarasvati Valley culture, you have archaeological sites at Rajasthan, such as Kalibangan. That's only about 8,000 years before present. But at Mirgara in Pakistan, you have 12,500 years in antiquity, and they're fully civilized. They have domesticated cattle, sheep, goats. They have the 88 constellations of the zodiac. They have gold, silver. They have 70% alcohol. The Greeks only had 15%, so this was a higher, superior alcohol technology they had, and they used plants such as the acacia tree and the wild rue. And the wild rue of that time and the mountain rue is the only rue that follows in the Far East. Cultivated rue, which is called Soma luta in the Vedic system of botany, is a more recent cultivated form. Soma Raja, or Pagunum harmala, contains several numerous very important molecules. It contains harmine, which is 7-methoxy-tetrahydrobutyrcarboline, which the body itself produces, which has a nuclear magnetic resonance of 8 cycles per second, as we demonstrate from nuclear magnetic resonance charts in our book, The Soma Conspiracy, back in 2002. Likewise, our pineal gland produces pinoline, which is 6-methoxy-tetrahydrobutyrcarboline, which is also in Soma Raja, or Syrian rue, or wild rue. So what is interesting with these cultures is that they had dark rooms. They had these labyrinths under the ground in which they practice a mystical rite called the Trikadruki, which was the 3-day Soma ceremony, where you drank Soma, where you were in isolation, and you applied techniques of threefold cauldrons. Those are 3 energy systems: the heart energy systems, the life force energy systems, and mind systems, to purify the Soma. And they used the exact measurement systems of Saturn cycles and Jupiter cycles. That's how the Rig Veda is, in fact, composed. of 432,000 syllables. In great precision. We discovered, in fact, also that the genetic code, which was found in the I Ching by Dr. Martin Schoenberger, and further doctors found that the amino acid symmetry in the DNA 64 codon system also mirrors the trigrams system in the 64 hexagram systems of the I Ching. This actually is derived from the Proto-Rig Veda. The first hymn of the Rig Veda is following the Gayatri metric system, or Chandras, which follows 888 feet, pada, which has 8 syllables on, and then is the strophe, and then 8 and 8. 8 times 8 times 8 is, of course, an interesting number, but 8 plus 8 plus 8 is 24. This is how it's based. 816 is, of course, the system of the DNA, and this is how the first hymn is arranged. It's 2 groups of 8, then a proper divider and 8, and then another 8 sentences after that, exactly as the DNA, and that continues. We went 1,000 levels down in the human genome. Now, we can say the Rig Veda is so old because the Purusa Sukta hymn of this 10th book of the Rig Veda, the so-called unicorn hymn, which is 32 lines and is 16 verses, and Purusa appears 8 times, so it follows this 8, 16, 32 binomial system, is found in Miragara 12,500 years before present, pictorially, and where the Purusa beast, or sphinx, is shown to transduce a luminous man, a numinous man, you could say, that is superluminal, into animal codings and a grid system. And the mathematics of the underlying structure, semantic structure of the Purusa Sukta is in those pictograms. Furthermore, when I was in Kali Bangan in the end of 2004, in Rajasthan, I was in the museum. I was able to sneak, because it's not allowed, where academics had shown the 50 symbols of the Sarasvati ideographic seal semantics to the 50 Sanskrit letters. That's still academically secret. It's extremely elite in that sense. And that is preserved at Miragara too. Miragara then uses the botany of the 108 plants, which are mentioned in Book 10 of the Rig Veda, Hymn 97. And a lot of these plants are the psychoactives we know. I have identified nearly every single one of them, and some of them will surprise listeners and even ethnopharmacologists. They include plants that contain LSA, as well as psilocybin, DMT, 5-MeO-DMT, and phenylalanine and harmalines, and other psychoactive relatives. But the description is that an ultra-terrestrial or hyperterrestrial intelligence comes in a space-time machine to planet Earth and brings into genetic molecular form the primordial principles that are embedded in our universe, but before the universe is made, and is personified in 107 different plants that holds these particular key sequences. 108th plant, Soma Raja, or King Soma, enables them all to speak together. And 8 cycles per second is the nuclear magnetic resonance frequency of the harmine, phenylalanine, even harmalan and harmaline of the molecules within Soma Raja, or the Pagunam Harmala plant. And 8 cycles per second is the replication frequency that our DNA is constantly replicating 250 times in a second in the DNA molecule. So at 8 cycles per second. 8 cycles per second is not just an approximation of the Schumann resonance of 7.8 hertz, but rather is the hydrogen constant of the universe. Every cubic centimeter of the universe is hydrogen. 90% of the universe is hydrogen. 90% of the body is hydrogen, and the DNA hydrogen stair steps that hold the base pairs have a proton zipper that requires 8 cycles per second for it to replicate. So it is the DNA trigger healthy system that's happening 250 times in a second.
So just to butt in here, just to ask a key question that I've
yeah, please do. Yeah. Please do.
So Soma, in other words, then was Paganum harmala, which is Syrian rue, and you said the acacia, or was it a variety of different plants?
Uh, well, the variety, the 107, are called somyas.
Oh, okay, okay,
Soma,
okay.
Soma containing Soma Raja, the king of the Somas. Pagunum harmala, that was already botanically identified by Oxford academics back in some 300 years ago. I cite the literature in great detail. But it's the only rue, and we know it's a mountain plant that fits the complete description. Furthermore, the Soma plant is many, many things. The Soma plant is also described to be related to the pineal gland. It's related to be a mushroom that is coming out of the sun. Now, the perisolar region from the sun is hydrogen, and the shape of it is like a mushroom cap. It's a parabolic mushroom cap that goes to the position of Earth. At the position of Earth, it goes out into a stalk in the hydrogen winds of the perisolar region. So Earth is really where the cap of the mushroom hits the stalk in terms of the perisolar hydrogen. And hydrogen's single proton and electron has a phase velocity difference in their velocity, orbital velocities, of 1 divided by 0.10125, which is 8 hertz. So 8 hertz is the resonance of hydrogen.
And these somas plants were extraterrestrially brought to the Earth, or brought into this biological reality.
That's the description. Extraterrestrial or ultra-terrestrial or hyperterrestrial is the description of Book 10, Hymn 97 of the Rig Veda. But as I mentioned, the Soma plant is also a plant coming from the sun, and has the hydrogen analysis of the perisolar region shows it to be mushroom-shaped. Those are called swampa. There are 8 mushrooms in the 107 plants that are somya. So they're called swampa, very similar sounding to Soma. But the king Soma contains the 8 hertz molecules, and pinoline, which is produced when we dream and when we meditate, it has a nuclear magnetic resonance of 8 hertz. So that the shape of the plant released from the sun as the perisolar region is an 8 hertz continuum, and that the botanical plant contains something like 5 different molecules which all have a nuclear magnetic resonance of 8 hertz, and that our pineal gland also produces that, is very interesting, because that's the cosmology that Rig Veda uses. It uses a hyper relation. It relates many scales as a syntax. It is not linear in that sense.
Now that's fascinating. Eric, I know you wanted to ask a question. Personally, I find it something that I've always sort of contemplated, was the relationship between, like you were saying, things using extraterrestrial or solar as a metaphor for sort of spiritual enlightenment. But then if you go back to other sources, especially a lot of indigenous sources, you'll hear things such as going to the underworld, or sort of going underground to find the fairies, as the Celts sort of believed. And I sort of think I've sort of come to the conclusion that's more of like a feminine form of spiritual advancement, as opposed to the more solar masculine, transcendence form of spiritual or consciousness elevation. I guess my question is, I mean, what role do these two polarities sort of play? I mean, am I sort of on the right track with that? I mean, does the natural world, is it possible to sort of get deeper into the natural world as a way out of it, or as a way to the superliminal consciousness states? Is that a proper way of understanding that?
It's a very interesting question. I believe all nature is artificial, and the reality is artificial, and we can pretty well prove that. It's a rather shocking revelation to dawn on people. I think scientists are coming to that by simulation theory. We're coming close to simulated. The binary perspective of the feminine being within, and the moon and lunar, and the masculine, the transient and solar, came in through Hinduism. And I have to stress that the Rig Veda is absolutely not Hinduism. It doesn't have reincarnation. It doesn't have these linear understandings. It doesn't have these caste systems. It has the mystery of the anthropos, that each person is the highest initiation, that each person is the absolute mystery, completely and totally, and is playing the mystery. So the idea of Purusa, which became Purusha later. So after the Upanishads in Hinduism, Purusha became the sun, and Prakriti, the consort of Purusha, became practical matter, and it was said that Purusha, the sun, was in matter, so God is in everything, which is a complete illusion that can't deal with the Copenhagen loop of infinite regress in dealing with God. Or with the numinous. It's a catastrophe in terms of theological eschatology. The Rig Veda, however, the Purusa Sukta, is describing something completely different. It is saying Purusa is all this, all that has been, all that is, all that will be, all that bats its eyes, and all that doesn't. So inanimate and animate. Its female aspect, Virat, is made from the Purusa, but Purusa is made from Virat. So they make each other, or they are a hyper state. Furthermore, Purusa is described to extend beyond this universe, the Brahmanda, by 10 golden fingers, or 10 spatial dimensions, into an omniverse of the Mahapurusa, or the Great Purusa, which is also called Manava, which is literally, our universe is described as a single grain upon the head of Ananda, which is an omni serpent with omni heads. And on each of the omni heads are lotus-like systems which hold grains of sands, which are universes clustered into multiverses, which are called Brati Brahmandas, probably about 36 different universes together, clustered into systems of 512 dimensionalities when you look at the underlying structure. And the omniverse is an endless variety of these. The actuality is described in the 10th book of the Rig Veda, Haim 81 and 80, the which is graphically given. There are 7 verses which are supposed to be related then to the 7 stones of our body, the 7 endocrine glands on the physical, the 7 chakras. And it is in the 4th verse that it says, "Oh, you somapas, you deep thinkers, think with in your heart mind, upon what foundation did the all-one maker stand, neither in existence nor non-existence, beholding all?" And the question is the answer. So you've got to ask in your own heart, what foundation is the all-one maker that's neither existence nor non-existence? And you discover yourself to be the foundation in cogitation, which is the mystery of the Rig Veda. And we are past, present, and future emanation of that. When the militarization of the Purusa Sukta and the Soma Pas, the Soma shamanism, and the mystery of the Trikadruki that was able to metamorphosize, this is how it's described, the human being as we know it now from animal man into a greater state, post-shamanic state, into the star Adam, and which was democratically leavened out by the Gautama family and others 8,000 years ago. Everybody was allowed to have that initiation, and many transcended our experience according to the Vedas. When that became militarized many thousands of years later, the cult of reincarnation was introduced, and this idea of separation, that the sun was divine and the feminine was encapsulated in matter, and that they're divisible. And this is the fruit of knowing good and evil. What hadronic mechanics is
right.
So this is the game, and this is how we stay asleep. And the whole universe is described as a shamanic ritual. There's a dragon of ignorance, and it's containing visa, or poison. But when visa becomes conjugated, and that's done by vasi, or breath, which is an anagram of Visa by a shaman, which Rudra was the lord of drugs, who has an epithet Siva, anagram of both Visa and Vasi. Then when you become intoxicated, as the poison becomes aware of itself, you become drugged. And the third level, where become sentient or cognizant in cognosis, is where medicine is produced from the poison. And this is the idea of the whole mystery of the universe. In that are the principles of the dream that encapture the actuality of our consciousness, and the anthropic nature, which is irreducible, the fourfold Godhead, existentially there for anyone who cares to examine. Everybody is the highest initiation. Everybody is the Purusa, which is both the Viraj.
The poison, it being the knowledge of good and evil.
The poison would, as soon as one believes in good and evil, that's the poison. Yeah.
Okay.
So the original sin,
exactly, which is essentially the core idea of, in the West, what they call the alchemical principles. This foundation, and honestly, all these metaphors are kind of aimed at the Western idea of alchemy. The fruit of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil,
which are plagiarized Rig Veda. They're absolutely plagiarized Rig Veda.
Exactly. But the core idea, though, is that all theological principles seem to go back to this same singular principle. It's universal, even across large amounts of time and space on the planet. Shamanic ideas in South America and North America kind of mirror these very ancient ideas that originally documentedly stem from India and the Pakistan and this plateau. And so it's strange that these things kind of seem buried in our psyche, as Carl Jung said. That we have these symbols embedded in the human psyche. So why do you think are these ideas so universal? I mean, is it just encoded within our genetic makeup that we have these ideas, these basic truths, kind of hidden within our thought processes, our symbols?
Well, I agree with your question, your answer. I think that can even be proven. I could talk a great deal on that with documentation. Furthermore, the cutting edge of academia in looking at the mystery of the anthropos. The anthropos is in the Hermetic Pomandas, it's in the Nazareans, the Egyptians, the star Adam, the star Emmanuel, or Imwa Anu El, name of Ptah, and the mysteries of the Greek Eleusinian mysteries, Dionysian mysteries, the Masonic later derived mysteries, the Essenian mysteries from the Essenes, and so forth and so on. And the various,
list goes on. Yeah, the list goes
on. Basically, they're trying to find the root of the idea of anthropos. I mean, in the Bible, anthropos is translated as son of man for Jesus, but anthropos goes back to the Purusa Sukta. It's the oldest form. The whole pneuma, the breath system of the Greeks, the botanies that are put in the Bible. Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, the 40 volumes, he's one of the translators and coders of the Bible. In our book, The Soma Conspiracy, we show that the Bible is a shamanic medicine. It mentions the exact plants, and these plants are the Soma plants. Now, the South American shamans, they are using ayahuasca and a wide variety of plants. But there are clear connections in archaeology for them to the east. Furthermore, I know through shamans that I've met from secret traditions in Peru and elsewhere that they are also maintaining contact with the so-called star gods, including in the physical.
Which are here at this point then? You say there's clear connections between South American shamanism and the East.
Yeah.
And also connections with what we would call star gods, right? So that second connection I can certainly understand as being part of the alchemical tradition, the occult tradition, of having imparted knowledge from the divine, is what they would describe it as in antiquity. Do you think there was a physical connection between South America and the Far East?
Archaeologically speaking, that's there. Mushrooms and jade have been found in archaeology to have been distributed. If you look also etymologically and numerologically and astronumerologically, you have the same. The Purus, the people of the Purusa, which is also a group of people in the Proto-Vedas, not the Vedic literature, but it's also contained there. But in the Proto-Vedic literature, the Purus actually go to the area of Peru. So the people of Peru, the Purus. And their Viracocha or Viracocha, the measurement systems that are used, the Venus cycles they're used, they follow the Brusa family with the Venusians. There are descriptions of various arcane families. These families are in the world, but are also beyond this world, in a secret game board. And playing the game of man in different ways with different opportunities and producing a lie on different levels so that the result, the Eschaton, the final object of the individual, is possible, where the individual gains their own realization. This has become very poisoned in our day and age by secret societal interpretations of the original Purusa Sukta. So you find that the family systems, some are focused, the Venusian system of measurement focus on a kind of exoteric, a focus on realization through external measurements. The Angirasas, which are operating complementary and are associated to Jupiter. The Angiras is the root of Angelos, or the angel family, and they're some of the authors of the Rig Veda, and it is described that they are extraterrestrial, but not linearly so, and that we are genetically derived from the Angirasas, and they work with so-called more inner operation systems. However, what we have discovered, and what we were relayed initially, and I had to research it during my teens, and I found, in fact, that the communication, I received thousands of pages of information in living images, holographic images. I would stand under the UFO in 1986. A beam would come down. Other people would see this UFO, none inebriated. But it doesn't matter if you're inebriated or not. These objects are there. There's different types of maybe interfacing might result with inebriation. We've done those tests too, which are quite interesting. The beam inculcates one, and one goes into a living flow of information and living holographic images. A little bit similar to what one might see on the high-dose DMT, where every idea is a living entity moving in different directions, very, very similar to this, with a transient index code that links to every other image of its kind, which is more in regards to, let's say, 170 milligram ketamine states, Dr. John Lilly's network state. Not exactly, but they're close approximations, so that's kind of an interface to deal with it. The other thing that would happen would be that I would be brought into what I call ETI VR, or extraterrestrial virtual reality. The beam would take you into a projected state where you have your 5 somatic senses, and you're taken into a ship, and you're transported through and redigitalized through portals and into underground bases, and you go into translinguistic. I'm talking about Ganymede and Triton, the moon of Neptune. You're transported into these bases, and in underlunar bases, and in these underlunar bases, these translinguistic substances, if someone else walks in there, all of their mind is in there, and you have a transliteration according to your 5 senses in synesthesia as one super sense, is transliterating their experience wherever they are modulated from, according to an octaval system, and suddenly you know a past, present, and future information manifold. And so suddenly I had a whole numerical number system from that. This was my kind of basis. So I had that information first as a blind teenager. Yeah.
may I ask, when you talk about Ganymede and you talk about Neptune bases, are you talking about something that's physical or extra dimensional, or what are the specifics of
Yeah.
those bases by which you speak?
Yeah. Okay. In this field, absolute integral honesty is essential. There is especially the contact T field. So I have to be completely honest. I don't know if it's physical now. Where I was transported, I know that I was redigitalized, and in the redigitalization, it seemed like now. Um, and that was the connotation of it. But I can't say for sure if it's our future. What I do understand as a good stepping stone is that we will be building space-time machines, maybe our great-grandchildren, and as soon as we do that, the matter that can enter those hadronic space-time machines must be space and time traveling. They must have greater moments of now. And as a result, space and time traveling will open up in the hadronic space-time machines. Hadronic space-time machines by Illert and Dr. Centillier, they've patented them, can soon be realized in terms of faxing hadronic materia, which is not as our body is now. It has to be in a completely hypermagnecular state. As soon as you've got the first hadronic fax machine there, all past, present, and futures that have them can fax to that point, and the ratio is dealt with. Not it overcomes the grandpa loop through the hyper and the hyper and the isoplane of hadronic mechanics, which is very complex and hardly anyone knows about and hasn't been dealt with these different areas.
And I agree that yeah, it seems like that, honestly, one of the most interesting things to happen in science recently is that we've been able, the scientists, reputable scientists, have been able to manipulate entangled particles. That is quantum entanglement, that is instantaneous recall, instantaneous transportation, teleportation, things like that. It opens those doors, and we've been able to do that just in the past year or so.
But this is still the superficial science. You see, hadronic mechanics is showing that quantum mechanics. There's a problem with quantum mechanics because it's only at a certain scale, and then you have post-quantum mechanics indicated by Bohm and Sarfati, but they're still dealing with dark matter. At least Sarfati is. Dark matter is complete hogwash, and so is dark energy by hadronic mechanics. Hadronic mechanics has it on a macro level. So you're going to the femtometer range. You're going to 10 femtometers. And once what hadronic mechanics has demonstrated is that, quantum mechanics can't deal with the biological system. It can deal with metals. It can deal with crystals. It in no way can model even a second of the DNA because it can only deal with single potentials. And the base pair of the DNA is 2 by itself, and their interactions is impossible to deal with any thesis in quantum mechanics. So this 1936 science is literally toilet paper. It's a distraction for humanity. It's pseudoscience. It deals with the external equation only. And what has been discovered in hadronic physics, which can clean up the entire environment, it's been done again and again. It reverses radioactivity in just 4 days, but that's completely taboo. The scientists have been threatened. They will lose their jobs, even their lives. The oil spill in the Gulf, a whole device was being contributed for free by Dr. Centilli, but the bureaucracy from Florida to the place in the Gulf where it was to be transported got in the way. It would have cleaned up all of this.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, because that would threaten the overall global capitalist system. Is something like that being used?
Well, it would have given 10 years of free energy, so to speak, or energy to America for cleaning up the Gulf, which is not allowed. The whole thing with what hadronic mechanics, why it's so exciting, and why more and more real scientists who dare to think, who don't just want the position, are jumping on and are discovering a whole other universe that just didn't exist before. What they have discovered in hadronic mechanics is there's 7 hadrons, wave packets overlap into a torus, and the wave packets overlap in infinite recursion. That means the recursion of the 7 hadrons in one atom overlap in infinite recursion into the heart of every single atom everywhere and every when, in every body, in all of our body, in all of planet Earth, in all of the solar system, in all the galaxy, the Andromeda Local Group, etc., and past, present, and future in infinite cascades. So it's discovered macro irreversibility. It's discovered the hyperplane. This is a macro plane that cannot be reversed. And this proves Dr. David Bohm's work. He was working at Los Alamos National Labs, and he said, how can you just say that you can separate these different functions of science and say that they can be separated? That's pure conjecture. I'm going to go the other way. We have to go from a whole unified state, because if you look at high charged metals, all of the billions of electrons know the position of each of the others. And so he came up with a single electron in the universe theory, which was that if you see a fish in a fish bowl, you have 6 cameras or 8 cameras aimed at that fish. And then you have 8 monitors that is watching as the fish turns, and it's turning in 8 different directions, like the billions of electrons in high-charged metals he was observing, and Los Alamos scientists were observing in the mid-50s. So he created post-quantum mechanics. The thing was, the mathematics, the physics, the geometry took until 1986 to be properly developed, and he wasn't aware of that, and it was verified only in 1998. And only in the last few years have tremendous breakthroughs there been made, whereas the rest of the world is being focused on 1936 physics, or CERN-like physics, which are massive distractions. Enormous amounts of money are being pumped there with very little practical results at all. I think string theory hasn't produced any practical application, whereas hadronic physics has immediately provided practical applications that are being used worldwide. The Chinese are jumping on board like crazy, so are the Russians. Corporate science is discovering it, but real scientists are jumping on board. For instance, my colleague Dr. Sten Johansen, Trondheim University, who turned me on to hadronic mechanics in 2001, who kind of disguised himself as a hippie, going to one of my courses. He gradually learned my jargon and turned me on to the implications of hadronic physics. He has just cracked the prime number code. On the internet reality, the prime number code is not solvable. But he solved it simply using the hadronic systems and using 512 dimensions in a musical system, the same musical system we use. And it's been proven, but he has to spend a lot of money each year to keep his paper in some form of scientific peer-reviewed periodical. He should actually get the Nobel Prize for that. He has resolved the problem of all numbers completely and absolutely. So nothing is arbitrary, and that's what hadronic physics is, the hyperoperator has shown. 43,200 is 432,000, is 432, is 4.32. And these numbers we're finding everywhere. Hamlet's Mill, of course, the authors of Hamlet's Mill, 1969, pointed this out in the myths, the shamanic myths of many cultures all over the world. They didn't get the age right on the Vedas, but the Rig Veda is supposed to be 432,000 syllables. There are said to be 432,000 Manusa humanoid races. But the radius of the sun is 432,000 miles. Our solar system, it turns out, according to NASA, is going 43,200 miles per hour towards Lambda Hercules. NASA says basically 12 hours per second, so 12 times 60 times 60, 43,200 miles per hour. Now, 12 hours contains 43,200 seconds. If you take the height of the Great Pyramid, 43,200 times, you have I think the polar radius of planet Earth, and if you take the base of the Great Pyramid of 43,200 times, you have the diameter of the planet. The planet Jupiter has a radius of 43,200 miles.
Yes.
Interestingly, the diameter of the sun is 2 times 432,000, which is 864,000. We have in 24 hours 86,400 seconds. Now, the distance between the way the Rig Veda looks at the sun and the moon, it doesn't look them as normal objects. They see them as a kind of torus Mobius, or a 4-dimensional Klein bottle that is a Mobius, where you have a pole called the Shamba pillar, where one end is the moon and the other is the sun. Sun and the moon are the same size when seen from Earth, the circumference of the moon's equator 108 times, and if you take the mean of the sun distance from the Earth, it's also 108 times. So this is an interesting.
So you have we have interesting mathematical correspondences, right? Which is what people have been talking about.
Ones.
Exactly. People have been talking about that for thousands of years, that there are interesting mathematical correspondences.
Geometrical ones.
And most certainly geometrical ones as well.
And without which there would be no life whatsoever.
Exactly.
Yeah. And our genetics is speaking the same way, because the DNA helix is rotating 36 degrees per base pair. At the base pair is a sugar phosphate that's a pentagon. Now, if you take
my question, Ananda,
yeah.
my question though, fundamentally here, is this information. It seems like, and I think you would agree, has been kind of concealed, mostly by the foundation of wealth and power for thousands of years. Whatever those government structures may be, whatever those power structures may be, it's been concealed from people. So my question, I guess, is double. One, why would this information be so concealed? And two, how does a person use that information to improve their life and to improve our society? I think those are the two fundamental questions that are revealed by the fact that this information is being so secretly concealed.
I think those are very good questions and quite pertinent to our present time. And if you look at the Freemasons, Sir Albert Pike is a high level figure in the Freemasons. He was a 33-degree Freemason for, I think, 32 years. And when he was a 33rd-degree Freemason, he went beyond the whole Jewish Kabbalistic levels, Merkaba, and he went to the Rig Vedic. And so his last books were on the Rig Veda. And if you look at his interpretation, and he had his epiphany, his apotheosis, obviously with some kind of substance, which is part of the whole Masonic secrecy. I know that directly from Masons, and it's buried in the Masonic literature, and is one of the eschatological groups that are battling a game for the new man. Now, Sir Albert Pike, when he takes the Purusa Sukta, which he takes also as the ultimate Haim, that is the model of the whole game, the eschatology, why the things are happening, why things are buried as a treasure, why humanity is now the initiate, as Sir Manly Peel Hall was saying in 1933, another 33-degree Freemason and the scribe of the Royal Council of Princes in Europe. He said in 1933, humanity is now becoming the global initiate. In Freemasonry, if you get in contact with your Christ nature, your Horus nature, your Buddha nature, depending on your lodge, then you will be tested by your lodge. You will be attacked by black and white magic. You will be attacked financially. Your reputation will be attacked. You will be attacked by poisons and poisoning. And if you're still in contact, then we know it's genuine. And so the game was said to be that in 1940, this humanity would become the initiate. And the idea was like vaginal liquids attack the sperm. Well, there's loads of sperms coming in, but the vaginal liquids are attacking like crazy. And so only the core seed comes through. Minimum of 8 that support the single seed, 8, 13, or something like that. And in hadronic physics, the different sperms act like a single sperm. They actually are a hypermagnical. It's evidence of a hypermagnical. They're really a hyper sperm in that sense. But the vaginal liquids have attacked. So humanity is in a silent war. And the laws are constantly changing because we're in our hypermagnicular or hypergenetic. It's a new field in physics, which doesn't follow quantum physics, and it doesn't follow the dead human genome understandings, and it doesn't follow neutron radiations in the way that neutron radiations affects us. It's within the hadronic horizons, completely different laws. That's the core of us, and it's in a past, present, and future state. It's in that sense also multi-valued hyperdimensional, as it's called. So the humanity is being attacked by a silent war, and the lie will always change. It'll always be different. There will be different things that are broadcast onto humanity. There will be different types of colorings and elements which, when come together, become a certain poison in the liver, radiations, or the various microwave radiations coming in contact with components in the body. In 1992, I met people way above the so-called power brokers of this planet, generally considered to be Rothschild and Rockefeller, which is not the case. And I was given privileged information, but I don't go into that unless I'm asked about that. I throw it out there always in an interview. If someone asks me about it, I go into it. If not, I can't. What basically he was giving this particular member of the Order of the Golden Fleece was telling me was that in the 80s, in Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola, there were a combination of elements that were in some brands placed, which under certain cyclotronic radiation exposure would produce a radioactive element, lawrentium, I think it was. And there were two simple and innocent elements unto themselves in only some batches of Pepsi-Cola and Coca-Cola, and which would be then transported at a certain time or over a certain period to a certain country, and cyclotrons like CERN would be given certain assignments of frequency generation by particle smashing, standard experiments, but which produce cyclotronic resonance, which happen to be within the range that would combine these elements together. And as a result, certain aggressions would break out. This is a gross oversimplification of the science of this data. The idea is that different vaginal liquids are attacking mankind. And you cannot be comfortable in this dream. There's nowhere to be comfortable. The media must lie to you, because if you subscribe to it, it will become breast milk and you'll fall asleep. And we're considered to be now the initiate awakening. That's their understanding of it. Although the Rig Veda calls this the time of the awakening dream, a twilight, that is really the synergetics of the conscious and unconscious into a superconscious state. So this is part of what is believed and is operating in the global game. And there seems to be eschatological battles between different groups of what they believe the end result will be. Of course, you see this with nanotechnology and picotechnology, which is all actually quite quaint compared to things that are now happening within hadronic computing, which works with the femtometer range and are working with the production of quasi-crystalline particles directly by reducing the hadronic horizon to its in the digital level of the subatomic particles to its cubic and dodecahedron manifold assembly system, and correcting the actual structure of the amino acids by the Rutherford model, so that certain resonances and frequencies can remodel that. So one of the end games is to produce the Atimanu, as it's called in the Rig Veda, the primordial alpha omega man, the super self, which becomes the Adam Kadmon, Adam Cassia in the Western and Near Eastern traditions, Adam Kadmon in the Jewish mysteries, as the new man. For some is the cybernetic man, is the technological man. I personally believe the transhuman will result from the superconducting DNA. And
I was going to say, you sound like you're talking a little bit about transhumanism here. What's your opinion of transhumanism as a philosophy?
I think transhumanism is not new at all. I think transhumanism is in the Rig Veda. It's described there as what the whole Trikadruki 72-hour Soma ceremony is about, that gave birth to all of the mysteries over the planet, and that can be documented academically. And
I mean, do you think that's what we're pointed towards, is transhumanism? Because I mean, there's many people with issues with transhumanism. A lot of people don't necessarily think that transhumanism is what we should be pointing toward.
You can demonstrate everything is already artificial, and you've got NASA's Dr. Eric Terrell, who found some of the moons of Jupiter and Neptune, Uranus, who is working a lot on the simulation of the universe model, and we seem to be so close that it's just a matter of time, maybe our great-grandchildren, that will be simulating our planet. And since we're so close to that threshold, it's very likely that we are. And there are a lot of different experiments that are indicating that. However, in hadronic physics, the whole inflation theory of the universe is not there. The Big Bang is not there. It's not necessary. And so, therefore, the understanding of astrophysical objects like antimatter through concave lenses has been recently identified objectively, and the operating cloud banks in Jupiter are now modelable in a form of invariance, in invariant mathematics rather than variational mathematics. It's showing basically that the whole universe is in a dynamic alpha-omega state. The omega point became very popular by Dr. Frank Tipler in the physics of immortality. And he uses logistical systems to point out that, we will increase our computer science, we'll increase our neurology and life extension until we're practically computing with the whole universe and then generating the universe. And there are a limited number of computations for every permutation of our genome, so therefore every individual is calculatable and can be reanimated, can be simulated, and therefore is being simulated. The trouble is he had an omega point. The Rig Veda has and there is an antithesis to that. The Rig Veda has an alpha and an omega point that are indivisible, and that alpha and omega point begins in our own heart, and it is right now. So we have a kind of dynamics that way. When you apply that to the UFO extraterrestrial, which is the big story at the moment, the subentropic principle, and how that's unveiling itself, how the stealth of a super civilization, a hyper civilization, and this civilization that Sir Francis Crick was convinced seeded life here on Earth. He said there was not enough time on planet Earth. Yes, he took LSD, 100 micrograms, to envision the three-dimensional nature of the double helix. He admitted that quite openly. But he was convinced that on planet Earth there would not be enough time for the genetic processes that we know of, and so it must have been placed here by a probe. A probe may have been found in January this year by scientists with a bombardment signature that comes from outer space, but that's another story. The anthropic principle, of course, says that the universe requires an observer to observe it, otherwise it's not there. And the Fermi paradox says, so where are they all? But of course, Fermi was with Dr. Edward Teller, the inventor of the H-bomb, and they were talking about UFO sightings. And so as they were discussing their UFO sightings, then Fermi said, where is everybody? And then he came to the Fermi paradox. Now, CERN particle physicist Beatrice Gatovera, a brilliant female scientist, pointed out, well, we're probably in a subentropic principle because humanity is not really truly in a coherent satience or self-awareness yet. We have glimmers of it here and there, but we certainly don't have that together as a species at the moment. So therefore, the super civilization remains in stealth and must remain in stealth until this satience, this anthropic satience, coherent cognosis, emerges, which is kind of the passport by which we were revealed to this civilization. My understanding is that we are naked within the living room of this super civilization. They have had every level of genetic modification possible, every permutation they've already done. They've gone to stem cell level, they've gone to the subatomic particle level of computation, so that every genetic permutation has also been simulated at the subatomic particle level. Then they've gone to the 10 femtometer range and therefore gone into the hadronic ether and have gone into a past, present, and future hyper universe, multi-valued hyperdimensional universe, which is in point care symmetry is about 44 dimensional at a minimum, because point care is 11 dimensional and must be in 4 ISO unit forms of conjugation.
Which brings me to the question about the nature of these entities, or these hyperdimensional entities that you're sort of alluding to. A common motif that a lot of people throw around when you talk about these such things, and something that I've sort of experienced through my own quote unquote ecstatic experiences is,
Yes.
When I'm in these hyperspatial realms and communicating with these apparently autonomous entities, it always seemed to me that they had a vibe of being very ancient, but at the same time very futuristic. And you talk to a lot of indigenous cultures, and it's almost like a unanimous thing that they say at all parts of the world. They refer to them as as the ancestors, right? Something that came long before. But then on the other end of the spectrum, it's like they're far into the future. So it's almost like this realm that we're heading toward, this sort of eschaton we're heading toward, it's almost as if it's literally really is this sort of alchemical junction point where past and future, you know, like you were saying earlier, solar and lunar, these things all sort of become some sort of cyclical whole.
Mm-hmm. I think you're hitting the nail on the head there. In the Rig Veda, it describes how the Somapas of the past actually live in the future. And those who dwell in the far future are the ones who are coming to meet the Somapas midway in the ancient Stargate ceremonies of the Soma ceremony, which would also open stargates with starships and UFOs. And portals that, wormhole-like portals are described. It describes the Earth as round. It describes the speed of light as 4,440 yojanas in half a nimesa, which is 300,000 kilometers per second. Of course, 432 times 432 is 186,240, I think, miles per second. So it's the speed of light, so knowledge of this is given exactly. If you take just the logistics of our future, we develop space-time machines. We start to time travel as well as space travel using the hyperplane of hadronic physics, which is not hypernumbers of Dr. Charles Muses, who won the Nobel Prize on hypernumbers in 1963, which he said then in the Lion's Path, 1988, I think, he received from feline beings from Sirius. Hypernumbers is completely different to the hypertopic plane of hadronic mechanics. The hypertopic plane is the revolution of all revolutions. It's superluminal, it's past, present, and future. It's the hypergenetic state. Our genetic state now is a past, present, and future state in its animate form, not in its dead analyzed form. The eschaton is an interactive thing. Every moment is the eschaton in this model. So if you take humanity as Homo sapiens related to space and time traveling humanity as Homo universalis. Homo universalis will be using space machines, but must use time machines at the same time, which will also be using the 44 dimensions of the multi-valued hyperdimensions based on the hyper unit of hadronic mechanics to enable this hyperlocomotion, which is simply the moving of hypergeometries without an actual engine per se, digitally, to enable yourself to be transported to different dimensions in space and time. But the body that must be in the hadronic space-time machines cannot be a percentage quantum as we are now. So we have to be completely in a state of shamanic ecstasis, continuously, in a state of 8 hertz. But 8 cycles per second sets up 4 hertz in the theta range and 2 hertz in the delta range, 16 hertz 32 hertz in the beta range. It also sets up gamma radiation, weird gamma radiation, and high beta states in whole binomial sequences, which basically links to the overall frequency spectrum. You can take 1 divided by 49, which produces 0.01, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, etc. And it covers the complete frequency spectrum. The humanity then that becomes Homo universalis is based in time travel. They will select a planetary system. Let's say one chooses the nearest solar system, Alpha Centauri, which is 4.32 light years, or take Sirius, which is 2 times 4.32 light years or 8.64 light years, uses assembly systems to develop life there, and perhaps chooses 200 years in the future. And they're more shamanically realized in their body. Their body is more biosuperconducting. They're having a social apparatus as well as a personality apparatus that's constantly in 8 cycles per second. Now, super learning is 3 minutes of 8 cycles per second, then studying Japanese. You learn Japanese in 3 years instead of 5 years. Einstein imaging technique. You use all 5 senses to imagine you have contact with ultra-terrestrial or extraterrestrial intelligences and speak it. All 8 poles of the brain are synchronized at 8 hertz, as Dr. Reinhardt showed. and you get patents that work according to the U.S. Patents Office. It's a whole story unto itself. Mental photography, which is 2 million words per second through a stroboscope, you're in 8 cycles per second. So when this becomes the foundation of the next generations, one is in a constant shamanic state. The pineal gland, by being in outer space, will be producing massive amounts of phenylalanine, which is the same as harmine. It's just a 6-methoxy position instead of 7-methoxy position, and this intercalates with the DNA. Its flat state is perfect to intercalate with the DNA. It does, as Smythe showed in 1969, Dr. Smythe's, intercalate with the DNA superiorly. It's the superior antioxidant. It donates to the electrons of the base pair. It resonates at a nuclear magnetic resonance of 8 hertz. It has a proton-proton spin-spin coupling of 8 cycles per second, which is the resonance of the hydrogen in the universe. 8 cycles per second passes through a vacuum and a triple Faraday cage of copper, triple vacuum, triple copper. Nothing passes through that, but 8 hertz passes straight through, which means it orthorotates at 90 degrees and 90 degrees, 180 degrees, which means that 8 hertz is absolutely everywhere and is nonlinear as well as being linear. 8 cycles per second takes any static and produces the golden proportion in its cascade, or phi to the second power, which is 36 degrees, 36, 72, 108, etc., 144, 432 is in that sequence. And 8 hertz sets up the binomial sequence, which is 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, as we mentioned before. So it sets up infinite recursion and coherence and ordering. And this is what Dr. Stephen Wolfram's Rule 90 is about. He was using random number generation on computers in his castle. After he developed Mathematicus, the software program, he got rich. He decided, well, my LSD trip is to have a castle in Switzerland. There are 40 computers just doing random number generations. And lo and behold, he found that they started to produce geometry, embedded geometry, the Sierpinski cascade, the binomial triangle, as rule number 90.
Is that alchemical secret that intention can produce results in the physical world? So again, like I must ask then.
Or the other way around.
Or the other way around, absolutely.
Or their conjugation.
The question that I must ask then is access to this hidden knowledge going to produce a better world? Right? Because fundamentally, I think the fundamental question is the fact that if it does not produce a better world, then it's dross and trash. It's useless. It's a red herring. So how will access to this knowledge ultimately produce a better world? You know what I mean? What is the net effect?
It's so multi-valued, but again, bringing it down to the personal and what we can apply now. If we look at this politically, or what's behind the politics, where votation is completely illusion now. Those parameters don't really exist. Of course, one can stop voting and you'll still have vote scams. So the revolution is something very special, and it's inevitable, and it happens on many, many different scales. It's a very exciting one, and it must happen, but things are probably going to get worse or more poisonous in terms of the tiny percentage that is providing the feed of what reality is. 8 cycles per second is what our DNA knows. 8 cycles per second is what all healers are shown to release from their hands. 8 cycles per second is what the heartbeat at the moment of love peaks at in its amperage. If you take the Heart Math Institute's in a balance application for your iPod Touch, for your iPad, your iPhone, you can measure the coherence of your heart. You'll learn compassionate love, and you'll feel it. You'll have an MDMA-like ecstasis. MDMA will give you 2 hours of 8 hertz alpha state, so it reminds one of that state. But within a balance, you learn the breath, and you see that you're having a 72 beats per minute cardio rhythm. Every now and then it goes to about 97 point something, and you're producing the golden proportion, and the amperage peaks at 8 hertz. And what's interesting with this heart field, as measured since 1991 by the Heart Math Institute in double-blind studies, is then they will take DNA, heat treat it, kill it, so the double helix will uncoil, do a fluorescence reading of it, and then they will have the pilot, who's measured on computer, to be producing coherent cardiorhythms. The 7 layers of heart muscles are the 7 spin angles, that toroids or particles of light will spin at according to the rainbow, or according to the spin axes of the tetrahedron. Exactly in one heartbeat, the compression of 7 toroidal magnetic fields compress according to the 7 spin axes of the tetrahedron, the water tetrahedron, the water producing the prism effect, for sunlight producing the rainbow. So from the rainbow to the sun, from competition to coherence. By practicing that and learning that and then focusing on the DNA samples, the pilots since 1991 could then choose. They would say, I want to uncoil the DNA. In just 2 minutes, they would focus this compassionate love field on the DNA, and fluorescence would be read through it, and it would be uncoiled or coiled more. And this was then taken recently, in recent years, to half a kilometer distance, where the pilot is measured on the computer, half a mile, because it's American, from the lab where the DNA sample was, and an instant transformation according to the will of the individual, but only in compassionate love. Now, when the control was taken, the same pilots in an argumentative state or a stress state or a yabble state, no results on the DNA at all. Then recently, they were able to produce 3 results on one sample by a pilot. So the pilot would on one sample choose that some of the DNA would uncoil, some would coil, and some would change in the middle, which shows an absolutely non-linear effect of compassionate love on the DNA. An implication of this, if we reduce it, is that humanity only has genetic free will in a coherent, compassionate love state of 8 cycles per second. This is something
That's interesting.
And this is where everything becomes interesting.
Yeah, exactly. That's incredibly interesting right there.
I believe that is the anthropic satience that the super civilization we're amidst is waiting to see arise from us. It's never going to save us. It's going to give us strange clues of all kinds. Some people are going to get right in the face. Some people are going to have it really physical. And that is happening clearly. Some people are going to have it through interfacing. The entities one sees, for instance, within DMT are, for me, more genetic in terms of hypergenetic. They're the living intelligence of the DNA transliterated to the DNA, to the RNA, because DMT intercalates with the RNA. So it's already genetic processes that are going to be carried out by the RNA. So you get glimpses of that. When you have phenylalanine or harmine in the DNA, and there is a sonic resonance by the Icaros, the shamanic song, or harmonic resonance, the DNA sound, the internal sound that you sing out and use the heartbeat as the bass drum. The heartbeat will go to 72 beats per minute, so it'll start to go into a circadian pulse. The circadian pulse is 72 beats per minute, something we use in our music. By itself, there is going to be a resonance between the intercalated harmine or phenylalanine in the DNA and the DMT, or 5-methoxy-DMT in the RNA. And when there is this resonance, you have kind of the source code of the angelic code, DMT being kind of the messenger RNA or the angels carrying out the instruction from God in the heart of the DNA. So you get the hypergenetic entity. Of course, our hypergenetics in hadronic mechanics is the past, present, and future summation of everything we will do as a hyperhologram that is existing and interactive at every moment. And of course, cannot be divided because the hadronic horizon, the 7 hadrons overlap their wave packets in infinite recursion. Is not indivisible to anybody else, and that means also ourselves as space travelers, time travelers, which leads us to Homo Universalis, where we use the resources of the whole universe using the hadronic horizon and using the hypertopic plane, of course, as a measure to Homo sapiens. So in that sense, you will get a Mobius. If you take a piece of paper, you turn it into a tube, and you link the tube pieces together, and then you twist it, you have a Mobius strip. And in this sense, Homo sapiens is one side of that strip as linear time humanity, which enables the other side, nonlinear time-traveling humanity. Both exist by each other. Time-traveling humanity goes back into the past, makes sure that the local universe is on a digital level arranged, so the sun and the moon are the same size when seen from Earth. The moon is exactly at the right place to produce the tides, water flow over the planet, the right magnetic frequency spectrum for bacteria, so that life as our own intelligent life can be maintained. They see themselves into the past, and into a kind of amnesia barrier into the game, which is then the reference of Homo sapiens linear time, which on one side of the Mobius, the other side is then the time-traveling mind, the time-traveling Homo universalis. What's happening now is that the conjugation of both is occurring into synergy, which then produces a parabolic realization where the base of the parabole is linear man, and the top of the parabole, which extends to infinity, is then not only Homo universalis, but Homo omniversalis. It's literally going into hypertime, hyperrelativity. All these are exact physical denominations now in hadronic physics. There are thousands of papers on this, and a lot of the listeners who are interested in physics can look this up on our website, anandabosman.com. If you look at our 44 multi-valued locas and talas of the multiverse, Grailzine, I think from February this year, the second half of that Grailzine on our website gives all the latest literature, at least as of November last year, in hadronic physics. It is a new universe. There's been nothing like it before. And it also implies that we are the extraterrestrial, we are the time traveler, we are the disguised human universal man. We are wrapped up. We're not even three-dimensional. There is no three-dimensionality in hadronic mechanics. The living DNA is multivalued hyperdimensional and is past, present, and future already. So we are those extraterrestrial races. But the way that we conjugate or phase conjugate to that with our cognosis is by the simple heart of the matter, compassionate love.
Which makes me wonder, what was the point from an experiential standpoint? What was the point of the whole human drama? What was the point of quote unquote time? Was it just this journey, this hero's journey of realizing fundamentally what we are?
I like your use of was. Apart from was being an interesting Egyptian term, the staff of measure was was. Yes, I see your point. But anyway, the human journey, the way I see it is there is not just an Eschaton, there is an alpha and omega. Put it this way, you take the 2% that is the human DNA, and you take another 1% out of the remaining 98%. Let's say it's frog, or let's say it's insect, or let's say it's reptilian, let's say it's praying mantis, or let's say it's dog or feline, and you make a whole universe based on that 3%. It's got the human genome plus 1% insect or 1% reptoid, and you produce a whole planetary series of systems that has its own underlying vector matrix integral template, and the bipedal satients will take a series of permutations to develop. At a certain point, cognosis, coherence, is realized, and computation, it will happen probably through technology, but through biofeedback and through experiential states of apotheosis, whether induced by the parameters that society allows, or by the technologies of psychoactive plants in those planetary systems. I mean, the 240 phenethylamines that Alexander Shulgin developed, we have receptors for in our DNA, and those receptors would indicate that our body was designed to be in contact with them, and so therefore they must be in some of the exoplanets of our galaxy existing in nature there. So well, let's say that then the reptilian humanoid comes to an eschatology. It comes to the final realization of satience, and at that state it begins to be able to time travel to other space-time universes that are within a kind of matrix of cubicles of universes, where that 2% plus 1 is developed through the whole 100% of the DNA. So you have the insect form, the dog form, you have the vegetative form, you have vegetoids. So each of these reach their eschatology in a kind of parabolic sense, and as an evolutionary or hyper-evolutionary spiral, reach their alpha omega point. And that is part then of this hyperplane, this alpha omega plane, that is playing dynamically to every point in, let's say there are 64 of those, or let's say there are 100 of those for the 100% DNA, 100 of those different squares. And they're all played out, they're all dynamically. The square itself is past, present, and future, but the hyper-eschatology, the hyper-eschaton, the hyper-operator of hadronic mechanics, it's always an alpha and omega, and the alpha omega is indivisible. It's an all and a one. It's immaculate emptiness, infinite oneness, indivisibly co-present, if you put it into a Buddhistic sense or understanding, also Proto-Vedic sense. Just as the hadrons, the 8 hadrons that have infinite recursion in their wave packet overlap, if they're reduced through the Minkowskian space-time meter, they're reduced to a value of 0. So they're infinite and 0. Hadronic horizon, 10 to the minus 13 of a centimeter, which is in the heart of everything. So it is a kind of all-in-one. And so the alpha and omega is an all-one summation of all these 100 different cubicles of genetic expressions, which themselves, each of them are hyper-relative and are hypergenetic, so that all of their life of each individual is past, present, and future in the non-symmetry broken part of the DNA, and is constantly interactive. So in that sense, there is no evolution in that we're going to something. We already are at the heart of matter. If we go to the very heart of our matter, and the heart of the matter is compassionate love, 8 hertz is the peak of that, which induces also 8 hertz in the mind, where we're in every single dendrite of the brain at 10 to the power of 12 bits of information per second, rather than 10 to the power of 4 bits of information per second in standard beta rhythm. And in orgasm, or the contraction of the plexicoccygeal muscle, there is an 8 hertz occurring across the encephalograph, the EEG. So we have this triple 8 hertz, 8 hertz of the heart, 8 hertz of life, the nuclear life, and 8 hertz of the brain for maximum creativity. And the universal heart mind of the universe, hydrogen, is in a continuum of 8 hertz, and it's also nonlinear, and it orders everything up into rule 90, into the Sierpinski binomial sequence, which is in the Vedas called Amkara. So in that sense, we, in the heart of the matter, beginning at the heart, in compassionate love, and being in heart will, that is consciousness in compassionate love with a life force as a 3-in-1 dynamic, as a single whole, a trinary capacitor, because we have neurons in the left ventricle of the heart, AJS Purkinje neurons, which have 1,000 levels of fractality, according to Dr. Goldberger's work in the 80s. And we have, of course, the neurons in the colon, which act as our instinctual neurons. These 3 brain systems, which are distinct as intuition for the heart, instinct for the intestines, and intellect for a mind, these I's, intuition, instinct, intellect, becomes a trinary capacitor of 8 hertz in each, which is the regulator, it is the multiplier, it's the proton switch or trigger for DNA replication, 250 times in a second in a DNA molecule. There are replications of 8 cycles per second. So 8 hertz is constant, the 8 hertz is coherent, but we're not aware of it. We blinded ourselves to that. So how do we remind ourselves? Compassionate love, we start at the foundation of the heart, and when we go to the heart of the matter, we go to the heart of the atom. Because where is 8 hertz produced? It's produced in the proton hadron, in the magnetic monopole, in that proton hadron at the omegon there, constantly arranging itself through the meson octate hadron arrangement, which is binomial, to have the phase velocity synchronization of the proton to the electron of hydrogen, to enable then that coherent cascade from the hadron horizon. So by going into the heart, compassionate heart mind, we go to the heart of the matter, and we go to the state, which is the hyper-escharton, the alpha omega, which is the place we are now in for at this time.
So in other words, there's really essentially there's really nothing to even wait for. I mean, essentially it's
in that sense it's not really waiting.
In that sense, I guess waiting wouldn't even be the right term. Yeah.
You would gain weight by waiting.
Well, Ananda, this has been fantastic. Honestly, we're about at our time, but I want to do real quick.
That went quickly.
I had a question for you. You've talked about the pineal quite a lot, the pineal gland. I wanted briefly, before we close, to get your opinion on Descartes' idea of the pineal gland, and where you stand on his
his opinions as the pineal as a gateway to God, right?
Well, I both agree and disagree. Dr. Valerie Hunt demonstrated that before there is any neurological impulse or central nervous system impulse, there is a field which holds the information. So these are just transducers. The pineal gland may produce DMT and 5-MeO-DMT. The lungs produce much more, and we have a lot of DMT in our shit. But the pineal gland does produce pinoline. It does produce the ayahuasca or somahuasca molecules. And as I said, by darkroom retreat technology, which I developed in 1992, and I used a neurotransmitter model to base it on, and of course using the amino acid tryptophan helps in that, as well as specific nutritions that are used to help the pineal gland's metabolism, taking melatonin, serotonin cycle and starting to induce the great amounts of pinoline as the selective monoamine oxidase inhibitor, and also to engage the 5-methoxy-DMT pathway in several enzymatic pathways or steps, which are very specific and which we then tested on hundreds of pilots. I would say about 70% of the pilots had DMT experiences. 90% at least had 5-MeO-DMT experience. Everybody got pinoline experiences. Everybody is familiar with pinoline because that's how we dream. That's what Dr. Jace Calloway demonstrated already in 1993 at the University of Kuopio. And the loterine, which lotus is the teaching of the Buddha, the lotus posture in the yoga, etc. Loterine is harmalan. And so there are 8 lotus plants, which are in the Vedas, which are in Buddhism, which are all in the spiritual cultures all over the world, which produces rapid eye movement. Loterine or harmalan produces rapid eye movement. So that also has a nuclear magnetic resonance of 8 hertz. So we are familiar with that. But by light isolation and by rediscovering the darkroom retreat secret, because there's been a lot of mythos about it, absolutely no exposure to light is allowed whatsoever. It must be strict. There are exact pathways and time sequences by which the pineal gland produces endohuasca or endogenous ayahuasca. And at a certain point, when about 360 milligrams has been reached, pinoline and some of its relatives, then 5-MeO-DMT becomes clearly evident in a very gradual sense. 5-methoxy-DMT is very unique in that it's active already at 3 milligrams. DMT is 25 milligrams. So you notice it already at around 3 milligrams, and this starts to produce new growths, new serotonin neurons in the neocortex. DMT doesn't seem to do that. But 5-methoxy-DMT does, and they last for 2 weeks after a single exposure. So you suddenly have new neural growths in the neocortex, the astronaut brain or higher brain, and you start to get a light. A light appears, and this light is utilized. Furthermore, there is a synesthesia that begins, a very soft fusing of the 5 senses into a kind of beingness sense, a macro sense, which is embodied not just in the head, but is actually the whole spine. The whole spine becomes a kind of referential state of existential state of the observer. You become observing from your spine. As 5-MeO-DMT levels increase to, let's say, about 4 to 5 milligrams, you start to have senses with your feet, with your toes. You have synesthesia. Other senses are transposed to your feet. And there is this particular light that comes out, and that light is then utilized by the pineal gland as an atrophied eye, which is sensitive to microwaves, infrared and ultraviolet and sound waves. And that's what happens in the dark room. The atrophied eye of the pineal gland has all the apparatus to the visual cortex, and so the sound waves then become hallucinations. You keep your eyes open because all your inner imaginings become exteriorized, and you're walking in your dreams, and your hallucinations become your way to navigate, to find your food, to find the kitchen, to find the meeting room where we do the exercises, to converse, etc. So the pineal gland reacts to sound waves very clearly, but you've got to constantly go through a mini ego death. You've got to die and be reborn. If you keep doing that, then you can navigate. If you don't, like Mantak Chia, the Taoist teacher who studied with us in 2000, he is very systematic based on his martial art practice. So he was hallucinating out of his head and was crawling all over the place, and his DMT levels were off the wall. So he climbed into a small little cupboard, a tiny cupboard. He thought it was an enormous bathroom. And he had to be helped out of that. He wasn't able to go through the ego death. You've got to just let go and be again and just know what you know in the moment. And so that becomes your navigation system. And then as you start doing darkroom dancing, you start to see infrared and ultraviolet. We do an exercise where we just say now, 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 and we go anti-clockwise for half an hour, and we go very fast. But you don't think of the future, the past, you're always now. And that 5-MeO-DMT brings you in a very strong state of now. And 5-MeO-DMT, you have to go to the emptiness and oneness. You should never go just to the oneness or the emptiness. If you go to the oneness, you get caught into oneness demons or stuff like that. So you've got to go to the emptiness and oneness, the yin yang, the alpha omega at the same time. So that's a state of being. And so you do that for half an hour, and you just say the kitchen is over there and you run over there. You start seeing heat waves, and so the first thing you see is you see the cup and it's actually there. It's a bit bigger. If you keep looking at the cup, you start seeing every cup you've ever seen. So the nervous system becomes aware of itself, and every cup that you've ever seen that is used in your own nervous system, visual cortex, to produce the cup that you see becomes coexistent. So you become aware of your own programmer, that sense of the visual system. And clearly microwaves, heat waves, sound waves, electromagnetic waves are brought to the visual cortex and are used practically in the darkroom. We have, again, hundreds of pilots, and we've demonstrated that. The things get a bit uncanny on the 11th to 12th day when the cyclohexanone molecules are switched on, which are the ketamine relatives. This produces clearly dextromethorphan, ketamine, MK801, phenylethylamine-like states. The phenylalanine molecule itself has been demonstrated to become an N-methyl-D-aspartate inhibitor like ketamine. We have massive amounts of agmatine, an N-methyl-D-aspartate inhibitor, in our own body. In fact, ketamine, dextromethorphan, MK801, and phenylethylamine and its relatives are all spiking agmatine levels in the body. However, the breakdown of 5-methoxy-DMT becomes N-tau histamine, which is an N-methyl-D-aspartate inhibitor. So it seems that at that time, a completely different kind of altered state occurs. In DMT, you have everything becoming everything else. You have this, every movement is every other movement. You have a 4-dimension. Every side of the cube is kissing every other cube in a dynamic continuum, and infolding, outfolding. With the high-level ketamines, you're getting a transcendency of that. So you're getting a summation of endless cubes that are ratcheting cubes into a Mobius that is parabolic, past, present, and future. So you're getting a kind of retro-causality, making love with causality into a hyper-causality. And this is what starts to happen. So you start to have, you're remembering the future and you're experiencing that. And this is just with 14 days in the dark. So when you go into outer space, when we start space travelers, becoming space travelers, we're going to be producing massive amounts of phenylalanine, 5-MeO-DMT, and DMT, which means new serotonin neurons in the neocortex, and then the N-methyl-D-aspartate inhibitors, which gives us alternity. Because what does N-methyl-D-aspartate inhibition do? It basically freezes the electrons in the neurons, so the glutamine can't transport the external information, but there's a trickle of calcium at 8 hertz that connects all the cells. So you can only get the DNA proton information, the 8 hertz information, which is also the ancestral memory information. The ancestral memory is done by pontogenoculated occipital waves, which Dr. Leiner showed in, I think, 1963, University of New York, when Harmine was flushed through the Purkinje neurons. Then an 8 hertz heterodyning pulse would go through the body and produce ancestral memory waves into the mitochondrial DNA, where basically the summation of one's day is phase conjugated and phase cancelled. So the phases are cancelled, all the holographic phases are cancelled into infinite recursion, and therefore zero. And this is the nonlinear aspect of 8 cycles per second, which is then the hypergenetic plane or ancestral memory plane, which would be in a past, present, and future continuum, which is what we experience quite clearly in some of the shamanic states and altered states. Dr. Kelleher, for instance, demonstrated that it's not only psychedelics, and it's only a percentage of people who take psychedelics, and psychedelics are definitely not for everybody, and it's about time and timing. And I think it's also about dose. The very first time should be the highest quality, the best attention paid to it, absolutely sacramental, is dedicated to the utmost of unity self, for the utmost of realizing oneself. It's got to be super quality, and one should have at least 3 days and a month to integrate. This is more likely to produce a state of apotheosis that is just impossible to reproduce any other way.
I agree.
And the shaman is the existential foundation, and the integral information.
I totally agree with that. It should be foundationally based on having a good positive experience the first time and every time. You know. But I will say that we are out of time, Ananda. It's been a fantastic conversation.
It feels like we've just begun. I think we could go rolling for 864,000 years.
I completely agree. Honestly, I could do this. I could do this all day. And then honestly, Pat, doesn't it seem like most of our conversations? It seems like we just simply do not have enough time in the world to finish the conversation.
Yeah, there's never enough time, especially when it's when someone's got a lot to say and there's a lot of interesting content. There's never enough time, but we would love to have you back on at some point and to chat again.
Well, at this point, a few years ago, and as you know, last year I was saying no, but at the moment, as things look, I would accept your invitation. It would be a pleasure, in fact.
Well, we'd much appreciate that. We'd love to have you back on, at any time frame. So.
And also to get to know you guys a bit more. I got a little glimpse of some of your experiences. I guess we'll continue in inner space that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'd love to, converse with you privately and publicly in the future here.
Absolutely.
I think we just pierced the veil.
Indeed, so.
So, well, Ananda, why don't you tell us a little bit about, some of your books, your website, how people can get a hold of you, and how they can get more familiar with you, and then we'll sign off.
Okay, thank you. Well, there's about 5% of our information on the web. AnandaBosman.com, Bosman for Bosman, Ananda for Ananda, AnandaBosman.com, 432hertz.com, both spellings, although the HERTZ, 432hertz.com for our music, which is the application of these numbers in the equal tempering system. The numbers basically that the whole system of our planet, solar system, our DNA is based on, are the main places at present. I'm not a Facebooker, but my partner keeps that updated a bit, and emailing otherwise. And we're looking to maybe take an invitation to go to the United States after refusing invitations for years. And I think there are just fantastic people in the United States. I have to, in Europe, often dumb myself down because there's translation taking place, and the English language is an extraordinary language. I was kind of retrained in the English language by Sir George Trevelyan. Spiritual English was developed by Sir Francis Bacon, who clearly used entheogens and based it on the Satapatha Brahmana, which is an integral artificial intelligence. NASA Ames demonstrated that Sanskrit was the only ancient language that had embedded neurosemantic networks, and this was attempted to be incorporated into Shakespeare English. And so the English language has this conjugative system of self-awareness, and it's just impossible to do that through other languages. And there's a great deal of cognosis. The original Constitution of the United States of America is now the model for the world. It might be dying in America, but it has to be applied to the world, and this is part of the revolution of humanity. It's nation states. Each nation state has to have its own 27 amendments, as the 27 lines of Mount Meru. It has to be fractal. It's part of the revolution ahead. It's a difficult one. It's growing pains, but it is the people united, and it is the coherent foundation of the heart, compassionate love, that will bring us through. Thank you, guys.
Well, absolutely, and we'd love to welcome you to the U.S. if at some point you would like to visit, sir. It would be
yes,
it would be an excellent experience.
Are you in Illinois? Yeah.
Ohio.
Ohio. That's right. Lake Erie.
But very close, and we are the state of Serpent Mound. Yeah.
Serpent Mound. Yes, I see. Yes, right.
So, our great thanks to Ananda Bosman. You should certainly check out his works. We are Free Radical Media. I am Eric Scott Picard. He, my co-host, is Patrick Ryan, and we will see you soon on the next installment of the Free Radical Media podcast. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, iTunes, YouTube,